Hello, this is Chelsea with Pink Door Fabrics. We are well onto our way with this Queen of Diamonds block of the month, so hope you're enjoying it. I do, again, every month I want to stress that it's not a race, so don't stress out if you are still getting caught up. This is a good month for month 6 to do a little catch up because some of the blocks are a little smaller and a little easier to do. So again, all of the same fundamentals that we've learned about English paper piecing are going to continue to be applicable to each month moving forward. So now that you've got all those, you really have all the skills that are necessary to do this. It's going to be just sort of building on those, which is, we sort of did the hard part in that in the beginning in terms of fussy cutting and getting stripes and different things to line up. That's really as complicated as English paper piecing gets. So I wanted to just give you a couple of little tips and tricks for month 5 and 6. And I apologize. Things went a little crazy last month and we missed month 5. So I do apologize. We're going to combine those this month so that you're all set for that. So what I want to talk about is don't feel intimidated by this. While it looks like it's maybe one of the most intimidating blocks of this block of the month, same principles apply. No need to stress out about it. So let's talk about these little G diamonds here. Now, one thing that we talked about in the very beginning was spinning those tails so that they go in the right direction when you go to put all these together. It's something that if it works and it's great. If it doesn't, it's really nothing. I'm going to see if I can make one of these so that you can see how it wouldn't work well with these. And so my biggest tip for that is you're the boss of the fabric. The fabric's not in charge. So you tell it when you do these, when you're basting those. I like to do diamonds in this order. So when I take them, I lay it down and I baste one side and then the opposite side. And then I turn it and baste one side and then the opposite side. And that will give you pieces that have the little tails going in opposite directions. Now, depending on depending on the pieces that you're attaching these to, you could potentially run into trouble. So let's just say that you did and that these are going, let me fix this little guy, the wrong way. When you go to piece those together, let's just say, so in this case, let's say I'm going to put this with this and see the little pieces, we're going to pretend with this guy, are going the same way. What I like to do is, of course, I don't have a little Wonder Clip today, but I would clip it down here. I forgot my EPP bag. So what I do is I just simply hold those tails together. I take my fingernails and I hold them together at that end. And that way, it doesn't matter if they're both butting each other up. You can get right into that corner there, knot it off, and then just sew all the way down. And then I typically fold those in, when you get to this end, and even though those are going the right direction, I like to just fold it down, and that way you can get right to that edge. It's a little hard to see, right to that edge there without sewing through that tail. The reason you don't want to sew through that tail is then when you go to pop those open to pull those papers out, it might pop that little thread there. So it's a good habit to get in regardless of whether these are going the right way or not. And like I said, I just fold them back. That way you're sure you're not sewing through that tail end there. Go all the way along and you'll be just fine. Something we've kind of gone over that before, so don't stress about that. The one thing I did want to talk about with these little G templates, because they're little. These are about as difficult as this whole quilt gets. So with these, you're going to see you have, with the 3/8 inch seam allowance, you're going to end up with quite a bit that actually covers the fabric or covers the paper. So when you fold these over, you might not actually see any of the paper. Not a big deal. Totally fine. It's going to come out at the end, so don't stress about that. If for some reason this intimidates you, which is totally fine, I've seen lots of people do this in the group, and this is just a little tip and trick in general for English paper piecing, that let's say that you really love a certain motif and you want to be able to focus on that, but it's too big for the particular piece that you're cutting. As long as you can basically make your own new shape, which is super cool. So I'm going to piece this together, and these guys take 5 of these little tiny diamonds, and so what I'm going to do is you'll see in the pattern here that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If this seems overwhelming to you, too many pieces, any semblance of that setup, totally fine. What you can do is you can actually make this one larger piece. Or you could even piece all these G pieces together with a C and make it kind of a jewel tone shape and make your own new piece that would be a little less work and easier to do. So I know that this is a little hard to see on my pink cutting board here, but what I've done is basically laid those pieces down just the way that they look in the end. And I just have a piece of good old-fashioned Scotch tape. And you're gonna wanna be, oh, I didn't do this the right way. Let's back up. Pretty careful with this so that you don't add extra bulk to this when you're doing it. So I'm just going to lay a piece down and I'm literally going to butt these pieces right up to each other, and you can kind of futz with them so that they fit together just perfectly. And that piece goes there and this piece goes there. You can either tuck the tape in, fold it over, and then just fold it around. Or you could snip it off with your scissors or rotary cutter. So then out of those little 5 diamonds, you have kind of a silly little smushed hexagon. But if there's something in your fabric that you really wanted a fussy cut, this would be a great way to do that. And then you can just do the same thing for all these pieces around there. So it's less work. I mean, you've basically taken the work of, it's 5 times faster. You've taken 5 pieces and turn them into one. So not only is this an opportunity to do that, but I've seen lots of people say, oh, but I wanted, for instance, this is jumping forward, but with these J pieces, you could do much the same thing. Tape these together if, say, you wanted, you know, a different focal piece of fabric in those pieces versus what we've drawn here. That's a great way to do those. And so you can mix and match all these pieces. And that's the beauty of English paper piecing. And that as long as you've got a piece on which to sort of wrap your fabric around and sew, then you're all set. So that's one thing that I wanted to go over there if you wanted to make that a little easier for you. Moving back to block 5-2, this gets a little tricky, and this took a little bit of figuring when we were designing this quilt to figure out. So this end piece, as you can see, and these pro tips we've really put in there. So all the hard parts that we encountered when we were making this quilt, we tried to incorporate those into this so that you could see them and not have to do the mental gymnastics of figuring that out. So be sure to pay attention to those. But basically these end pieces are going to be the inverse of one another. So you're literally, instead of laying it down, and this is where using a friction pen on the back of your fabric or even on the front of your fabric, it's all going to get folded around the papers anyway. You're going to flip that over. So it's basically N reversed for both of those. And then you do the same down and over in order to get those center pieces. So that was the only sort of tricky part with that. I'm sure you guys did great with the 6-1. Same general principle. We're making a half block like we've done before. And you're just going to want to leave the seam allowance of these as we've shown in that picture, so that because it's on the edge of your quilt, you're going to want to have that seam allowance in place when you go to put binding on it. One thing, and I'm going to back up just a little bit here with 5-1, is you'll notice, and a few comments have been made about it, how these renderings or the digital drawings of the fabric are just a little bit off in terms of what you can achieve in real life versus the fabric. So when we started designing this, I won't bore you with the gory details of fabric production, but it happens really, really far in advance. And so at the time when we were designing this, we just had digital images, and try as we might to make sure that they're correctly scaled. Some of these are off just a little bit. So if you run into any trouble where you say, well, my snake doesn't fit just perfectly in there, this is very much open for interpretation. And if you want to, I saw a lot of people wanting to make the snake look like he was sort of swimming or slithering around in that block. You can certainly do that, but don't stress if it doesn't look exactly as ours. One thing I will direct you to is in the front cover of the quilt. This is a photo, I lied, just kidding. I will show you that in just a minute. There's a photo in here on the back cover of exactly how that quilt looks in real life. And so this is the way that it happens with a lot of fabric designs when quilts and patterns are being made, in that we have to wait, there's a significant amount of lead time before we get actual fabric. And so that's why there's a bit of a discrepancy through that. But if you wanted to look at this, it'll give you a better depiction of exactly how much of the animals can fussy cut and fit into those blocks. So, and I suspect that you'll find it a little bit with this 6-3. So again, you're going to be trying to fit these little owls in there. We didn't account for them to all be an exact same cut, because you'll see when you get your owl print that the owl faces actually go multiple different ways. And so if you find that you like these little moon and sunburst things better than an owl face, if owls just aren't your jam, that's totally fine. This quilt is yours. You can make it anything that you want it to be. So just a word on that. And then one thing I've also seen is that when you're putting together 6-point stars, I really find it easier myself. And again, it's up to each person what their preferred method is, but to take F to F. So I sew these two together, and I would start at this corner here, work towards the center, and then I put this F, fold it over, and work out. Some of that is laziness, so that I don't have to, if you start here and work out, then you can only put 2 of those pieces together at once before you have to change, cut your thread and rethread and go off. So I like to do these stars where I go from the outside to the center and then back out. So then you end up with sort of a funny, let's call it a crown shape, your half of your 6-point star. And then do the same thing for this side, and you're going to want to alternate those just so that they alternate in color here. And then I take this half and attach it to this half. And the beauty of that is that you can pin on either side or clip, whatever magnet, whatever your method is, on either side of that, and make sure that your center, we're just going to pretend like we've got one here. Let's say that this is your half and this is your other half. What you're going to do, and this is a little hard to hold, but I'm going to take a little tiny bit of thread, and where these two, I'm going to align those edges. So this is your half of the 6-pointed star, and this is your other half. Where those seams meet in the middle, you're going to want they're going to be opposite colors touching. And I like to make just like a little X in the center there. And so you're going to tack this side to this side and this side to this side. And it just is a 2 little stitch, and then you knot it off on both ends, obviously, so that it doesn't slide out. Cut it off. And then when you open it up, those points are going to match perfectly. And when you go and let's say that you went clockwise or counterclockwise, regardless of that, if you did this piece to this piece to this to this to this to this, there's just an infinitely small amount of fabric that gets sucked up in there. And so when you get to this, you're going to go, oh, they don't match perfectly, or they shift a little bit. And so this is a way to get those stars to align a little bit better. So if you tack them in the middle and then go back to the edge and go all the way across, then hopefully that center won't move on you. And as long as you've got these held really well together, they shouldn't shift from beginning to end at all. Beginning to end either. I've seen some people who say, well, I start at one end and go to the center, and the other end and go to the center. I personally find it to be a lot of extra work. So just that little tack there, if you're comfortable with it, I usually just put a Wonder Clip there in the center instead of, you can do it this way versus the extra step of doing the X sort of tacking knot there. And as long as that's held really well, then same thing, you should just be able to go from left side to, or whichever direction, one side to the other, and have that be fine. So that's a little trick for those guys. And same thing, you'll see a little bit here, there might be a little bit, you might see more or less of these owls in these blocks. It's, like I said, a rendering thing when we were designing this, so don't worry about that. You'll get the gist of what that quilt's going to look like. And again, you can refer to this. So with these stripes, because these are neon pigment ink over the fabric, they do have some more bulk to it than a traditional just totally screen printed fabric. And so one of the tips that I realized with this is it can be really difficult to get through both of those neon pigment inks if they're butted up together. And so again, this is your quilt. If it's easier for you to offset this so that it looks like this little stripe is connected to a neon one, you would basically just scoot that over. You'll have plenty of fabric. Scoot that over, align the stripes. And if you wanted to do both of these at once, what you could do, let's just play pretend here for a second, is if you wanted them to, if you wanted to cut them both at once to make it easy, that's totally fine. So these are your B half hexagon pieces. So I've got my little template. It's easier, instead of having to cut these separately and trace them, what you could do is lie one right on top of the other, right sides together or wrong sides together. It doesn't really matter, because you're basically cutting the inverse of that. And so you could lay this right down on there. I center those stripes kind of right here so that they're equal. And it's centered on here, but see the way that this neon stripe matches up with that neutral, and this neutral matches up with that neon stripe. So that'll make it easier when you go to put these two pieces together, that you're not trying to push through both of those neon threads. With regards to that, you know, it's just a thicker fabric because of the pigment ink. And so it just takes a little bit of extra effort. I would recommend starting with a new needle if you are going to do stripe on stripe or neon stripe on neon stripe with that. And then, so these should be a little easier. 6'4" and 6'3", I'm sorry, 6'4" and 6'2" are these little sort of half guys. So these should go quite a bit faster than a full block. So it's a good month to kind of do some catch up. And then, although this looks complicated, again, you're just making a half block here. So same principles that we've learned before. Again, with this one especially, I would kind of follow some of these diagrams. This is the way we like to put those together. If you have a different method, totally fine. But that way, you kind of keep all those seams aligned, and the things that are supposed to be butting up to one another butt up to each other really well. So that's what we got for this month. A little bit of fussy cutting. These guys with those lazy stripes, those will drive you bananas to try to fussy cut those. So those can just be willy-nilly. I know it drives some people nuts to do that. So if something else floats your boat, that's totally fine. And then next month, we get into some more blocks. So look forward to seeing more of your blocks and quilts. Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll certainly try to address those in future videos.